Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. The Roman Catholic Diocese of Salford announced overnight it had formally opened the course of canonization for Pedro Ballester. He's 21 years old, he's from Manchester. He is a student. He died 8 years ago, and he's been put on the path to become the Catholic Church's first Generation Z saint. Joining me to talk about this is Jack Valero, who knew Pedro very well. Jack, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Thank you for asking me. Wonderful. Wonderful to be in your program.
Well, I'm really glad to speak with you. This is an important event in the life of the Church. The first Generation Z saint is no small feat. Before we talk about Pedro himself in his life, I want to ask how are things on the ground now that the diocese has opened a course for canonization? How are people reacting?
Well, it's wonderful all over the world. There's actually a great deal of devotion to Pedro. A friend of his from university started a website, pedroballester.org UK, some years ago, and that website receives emails and messages of favors that God grants through Pedro's intercession, and so far more than 200 have been received. And among those who come from all over the world, there's great rejoicing that the course of beatification has been opened, and we can hear more about him, and the Church can study his life and then see whether he is somebody who can be canonized. Then obviously he needs to perform a miracle. A miracle needs to be performed through his intercession. But we have so many favors that he has have been attributed to him that we think it's only a matter of time before we get a medical miracle. So great devotion to him. There's a documentary on YouTube called A Friend in Heaven about Pedro and devotion to him around the world, which shows how the thing has spread like wildfire in only 8 years. And
this spreading like wildfire is another indicator that we call it a cult of sainthood. In other words, there's an interest in the seeking of this young man's life of virtue, let alone intercession. So tell us about the steps that you've all had to go through thus far, the first hurdle that he has had to clear.
Good. I mean, he as you said, he was born in Manchester. He was 18 when he was diagnosed with cancer. The year before, he had asked to join Opus Dei as a numeri, which is a celibate member of Opus Dei, to give his life to God in the apostolate, in bringing God to people in his ordinary life as a layman. And then he was diagnosed with cancer. He had 3 years of treatment and suffering. And during that time, he was very, not only close to God, which was obvious, but it was remarkable how generous he was, how he was always thinking of others. When I fall ill, I usually think about myself and how I am having a hard time and all that. But Pedro was the opposite. When he fell ill, he stopped thinking about himself. He thought only of others. And when you went to see him, he would always ask about you and what you were thinking. So when he died, there was such a thing among many people that from Opus Dei we put together some material and appointed a priest to follow the course, to follow the matter, and went to visit the bishop of Salford, which is where Pedro had been born and where he had died in Manchester, and put the case to him and say, look, this is a little biography of Pedro. These are the people who knew him. This is a list, we were asked to provide a list of people, and we provided a list of 50 people. Some were relatives, some were friends from university, some were friends from school, and most were Catholic, but some were not Catholic or even non-believers who would witness, who would give testimony to Pedro's life. And the diocese appointed a notary and somebody to interview people, and they started with interviews. And when they went through some of them and saw that the thing was going in a good direction and really there was something really solid there, then the bishop decided, this month to open the course. So there's been several steps. First, the appointment of a priest to follow it up from outside, the approaching of the bishop, the giving of the list of people who knew him, and then some of the interviews. But these interviews have to continue now, because now that the course is open, they have to be documented and then put together into a book, and sent to the Vatican for study, in Rome.
Tell us about his life. What was he doing when he was diagnosed? Tell us about the type of cancer he was diagnosed with.
Yes, so he, when he finished school, he applied to do chemical engineering at Imperial College London, which is a very prestigious university in the UK. And he did 3 months. And then after 3 months, he was still in pain in his back and finding it difficult to walk and to do sport. Eventually, he went to the doctor, and they found this big cancer in the bone, in the pelvis, near the hip. And they said, well, it can be treated, but it can't be operated on. So unless the treatment works, it's not going to be able to be cured. So treatment started. And he had been somebody who was a very cheerful fellow, very friendly. He had lots of friends. People liked to be with him. He was a leader. And but when he fell ill, he were two things which I think people commented on, which were quite unusual. One is what I said before, which is that he was constantly thinking of other people. And unlike other people who fall ill, who it's very normal to think about yourself and your suffering, he was constantly thinking of others. And the second thing is that he was a very happy person. He had been a happy person, but one might have thought that when you're ill, you're not so happy. But not for him. He was always a very happy person, and you could go to see him, and you wondered, why is he so happy? And then the conclusion was that he was happy because he was close to God, and he was good to people, and that made him happy. And I remember when he died, I offered to do a memorial card for his funeral, so I was putting it together in my computer for preparing to print it and so on, and I put his photograph and a quote from Scripture, "Good done, good and faithful servant." That's the quote I took from the Gospels. But then I got a phone call from the priest who had been with him when he died. He said, well, that's fine, but you must put another quote underneath about happiness, because Pedro was the supremely happy person who the suffering, he was happy in his suffering. He was not, he was able to live his life in this way. And 1 week before he died, there's a famous story that very many young people came to see him and say, and he would ask them, are you happy? Are you happy in your vocation? Are you happy with what you're doing in life? And so on. And they all said, oh, yes, yes. And then the last one asked him back, what about you, Pedro? Are you happy? And, he had 3 years of suffering. He was 1 week from death. And he said, I have never been happier. And one wonders about this and thinks, this is a very surprising answer. And the reason is that he was very close to God, and therefore he was supremely happy. And to me, that's such an amazing example for people, especially young people today, that God is giving us with this young man.
The beautiful thing, too, is his life in Opus Dei meant that not only was he committed to living a virtuous life, he had consecrated himself to a life of lay celibacy, and so a deeper devotion to Christ. Jack, thank you very much for sharing with us his story. Undoubtedly, we're going to keep up with it, and we're going to try to find out more about his life and how he can be a witness for others. Very quickly, is there a website that people can find out more?
Yes, there is a website called pedroballester.org.uk. There you can find lots of favors that God has granted through his intercession. Then in YouTube, there are 2 documentaries which I really recommend. One is about his life, which is about an hour long, and it's called I Have Never Been Happier. And the second one, which is very recent, it's only a few months old, it's about devotion to him all around the world, called A Friend in Heaven. And with these 3 things, you can really get into who Pedro was, what he did, why he did it.
So we have to stop there, Jack. The music is hitting. But thank you so much for your time. We've been talking with Jack Valero. Jack is a friend of the recently deceased Pedro Ballester, who is about to potentially become the Catholic Church's first Gen Z saint. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.